Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Guyana's Oil and You. I'm your hostess, senior journalist and editor at Kaieteur News, and Kiana Wilburg. And tonight, we're going to explore three key topics, simply but concisely. These topics are diversification, local content, and the much talked about Gas to Shore project. Our distinguished guest for tonight's discussion is Dr. Terence Richard Blackman, an associate professor of mathematics and a founding member of the Department of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College. He previously served as Dean of the School of Science, Health, and Technology at Medgar Evers College, where he has worked for more than 25 years. Dr. Blackman is also a former QC graduate, and despite living abroad, he's followed many of the topical issues in the oil and gas sector. Dr. Blackman, thank you very much for making the time for us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Wilburg, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much. So, we have just about an hour to engage in the exchange of thoughts here, and I'd like to jump right in on the topic of diversification. Now, since 2015, Guyana would have been warned over and over about banking all of its hopes and dreams on oil and gas resources and the wealth that's going to come. And the pandemic, I would dare say, has really helped to reinforce that point. With that said, how do you believe the oil money that we're going to get in the future should be used to ensure Guyanese have a diversified economy? And where do you think we should start and why?
So I think that's a really, really wonderful question, and it gives me a chance to sort of really say the kinds of things that I think are important for Guyanese to hear at this moment in this regard. Uh, I always say to folks that in 2014, Royal Dutch Shell sold off its acreage in the Stabroek Block for a single dollar, $1, and left Guyana after more than a decade. And when ExxonMobil sought new partners, only about 2 out of 22 companies were interested. And there were a number prior to 2015, number of failed wells were drilled offshore Guyana, and so I'm like the guy far away who's saying to you, the son who's gone into the future and saying to you, guys, you're very, very, very lucky. So that's the first thing. And so this is going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity for Guyana. And so, as with these once in a lifetime opportunities, you should really take here to kind of understand what's in front of you. So, as I was thinking about our conversation, I noted, say, for example, like the recoverable resource on the Stabroek Block is now estimated to be about 8 billion barrels, right? So let's just say, quick back of the hand calculation, 8 billion times 70, that's 8 sevens 56, $560 billion. That's a big number. I think many people are not even clear about like what does 560 billion look like, and that's just talking about things in the Stabroek Block. So there's much more, but let's just start there. And so I think this conversation that we're having around sort of, like how do we use this effectively, right? So I think you came to, in a sense, what I've been trying to do, which is to say, well, okay, look, I was, my roots are in Guyana, my family is there. In what way can I play a meaningful role in this context? And so the idea was to think, well, okay, let's write a series of articles, just thought exercises about what would you do with the money if you had it? and so I think this comes to your question. So I thought, well, education, workforce development and training, private sector business opportunities, how do you manage foreign investments, infrastructure, safety. In my cricket group, we're talking about the cricket in Essequibo and how there are very few international quality sports facilities in the Essequibo, which is the largest region of the largest county in Guyana. So, just sort of geopolitics, all of these things come to play in Little Guyana at this moment. And as you rightly identified, I think that the challenge that we have is how not to make it a one-horse race, how not to imagine that everything that we do is going to be focused on oil. And so part of what I wanted to do was to sort of say, well, okay, look, if you have the oil money, what do you do with it? And so this is where I got into this idea of thinking about diversification as a way of understanding the world. Oil is one aspect of the game, but there are upstream and downstream kind of things that are associated with the oil industry. What is Guyana training to do? What are our young people at the university training to do? What parts of the industry are they training to be a part of? Can the industry absorb all of our young people? Well, if it can't, where do they go and what plans are we making in that direction? And so, I think for me, one of the areas where I think it's really, really important is this question of agriculture. I think everyone sort of imagines that agriculture is not sexy. When we were in, I remember when we were in high school and they introduced agri. No one wanted to go to agriculture. We finally learned how to farm and how to kill some chickens and how to do the kinds of things that real people do in the real world, and people do these things in order to survive. And so in this sense, I sort of shared, and it was not an original thought to me. It was a thought that one of the things that I've been involved with is a math camp, and part of the reason for that is precisely around this, to say you're going to need technical skills, and so you have to develop a cadre of young people who can think about the world in a slightly different way than we're currently thinking about it. And so as part of that math camp, I wanted the young people to not just do math, but to see math in a broad sense, and to invite sort of Guyanese who were distinguished in various walks of life to kind of explain how math came to play in their work. And one of the guests was the now deceased Alison Butters, who was a very dynamic entrepreneur. And she gave a talk which left me stunned. She talked about the food import bill of the Caribbean and Guyana, and really tried to get the young people to understand that it's not just simply a question of getting 15 or 20 subjects and going to the university and getting a degree and then coming home and looking for a job, but really thinking about how you might actually meaningfully impact Guyana and the wider world. And in doing that from the perspective of agriculture and food. And what she pointed out was that the food import bill of the Caribbean was something of the order of about $4 billion. I think when I looked at this, about $4 billion. And so think for a moment, if what are we buying for $4 million? We're buying wheat, we're buying rice, the Caribbean's chicken, non-alcoholic beverages, juices, maize, soybeans, sugar, palm oil. Imagine if Guyana were responsible for just 10% of that $4 billion budget. That's $400 million. And so this is where I think the question of diversification, this is the opportunity that we have as a nation at this moment. We have this money, but this money is not going to last. And so, once they take the oil out, they take the oil out. We can't make it. It's taken millions of years for this oil to be there. So once you use it, that's it. Now you have these pieces of paper in some Federal Reserve Bank someplace. What do you do with it? Well, you can either spend it or you can have a real plan about how you use it. And I think for me, the bet that Guyana ought to make, given the size of its land, given the fact that we're not a very densely populated place, almost all of our people live along the coast. Given questions of climate change and renewable energy, I think the bet we have to make is agriculture. I think and if we can do agriculture right, then I think we can really we can beat the resource curse if we can do agriculture. I think if we just simply think of ourselves as, you know, somehow living on the oil, I think we're going to find ourselves. Uh, the world is moving against the oil business. We're moving in the direction of renewables. People are trying as best as they can not to burn fossil fuels. We're at this moment where it's tipping, and so we have to sort of take this moment and use it as an opportunity to pivot to something else. And I think that pivot to the something else, I think for us, at least, that's that's just my thought exercise. I mean, you and other people will have a much, will have to ultimately live with this. I think for me, it seems to me that agriculture is the way for the society to go. And there are many, many, many areas that can be developed in that regard.
Thank you
So
very much for that.
I can talk forever.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. I'm not one to be interrupting our guests during their explanations, because I believe sometimes in the train of thought, it's important for our listeners to really understand the length and breadth of the perspectives that are being offered by the experts and academics that we would bring on board. So just a quick clarification. We would have noted earlier that it's 8 billion irrecoverable reserves based on the numbers that would have been produced by Exxon. I think they've taken that up to 9 billion. So just to clarify on
Yeah,
that.
so I'm saying 9 to 9. That makes it even better, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just doing 8 sevens to 56, 9 sevens to 63. So that's $630 billion. So you have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, I think you open yourself to unscrupulous characters. And I think the thing that often is what is not fully appreciated is that there is a level of sophistication that comes from a first world society, and so there are people who know how to spend $630 billion quite easily, and without if you had the wrong character sitting there, they could spend 630 billion. Then you might be saying to me, what happened to my 630 billion? And someone said, well, I just spent it. And then you look around and you think, well, what did I get for this? Right? Did I
When you say
have I been
600,
able to develop?
my apologies, because I don't want the wrong
No, no.
impression to be conveyed. When you say that 630 billion is out there, you're saying that is totally for Guyana, or is our take according to the contract being considered in that?
Yeah, so our contract will say,
2%.
maybe we will have 50% of
Yes.
this, and so yeah, so a half of, but it's still the point I want to make is that it is a very significant sum,
Okay.
and it's not all going to be that. And when you have it, you have to have a clear plan about what you're planning on doing. And if you don't have a clear plan about what you're doing, if you haven't thought deeply about what you're doing, then you're going to end up in a situation where what is typically referred to as the sort of resource curse. You end up with a society where you still have a large number of poor people, and a few small individuals have somehow appropriated this wealth, and you have some gated communities and small group of people in good schools having access to all the appropriate things, and then the large population that's sort of sitting on the outside. And I think this is not a good model for Guyana. And I know, having lived in Guyana and having been raised in Guyana, that Guyana is a country that has a certain kind of an equitable sort of egalitarian impulse. And so I would hate to see us kind of develop into this sort of deeply unequal society where a small number of people have somehow been able to, access the large bit of the resources, and a much larger group of people are sitting on the outside looking in. And I think we run the risk of that if we don't have a real plan. I mean, there are a number of other issues that come to play, but I certainly think that having a clear thought about, you know, what our priorities are at this moment. And I don't, I'm not, I'm, so one of the things I want to make clear is that I want to speak outside of the political dimension of Guyana. So, you know, my criticisms or lack thereof would apply to all of the people who were involved, or, you know, my compliments would be to all of the people, because I understand very sometimes there's a bit of quicksand where, you know, everything gets viewed through this lens of, you know, which side one is sitting politically, you know, what racial or ethnic group one comes from. And I think this is the moment for, you know, in a sense, Guyana to grow up and to have a certain kind of maturity about, we have something here which can only be solved by having, you know, all Guyanese play a critical role. Guyanese in Guyana, Guyanese outside of Guyana, Guyanese of all races, Guyanese of all class backgrounds, you know, ensuring that, say, for example, our indigenous communities participate in this process. So I think we need to kind of take a step back and say, how do we ensure that all of our Guyanese are sharing in this once in a lifetime wealth? And to the extent that we can empower all of our Guyanese, then I think we will end up with a situation that is far better. You know, I can expound take for something as simple as the developing of niche markets. So, you know, we have a large number of indigenous products. You know, you think fruits, and these things have particular values in the global marketplace. This is the kind of moment where we seed these kinds of explorations. You know, many years ago, I read this wonderful book, which was put out by there's the group at the University of Guyana. It's a technical group, but the Institute for, I'm forgetting
Applied
the name
Science
of the
and
institute,
Technology.
but there is an institute there that does, yes, and so they put out this book about the plants in Guyana and its medicinal uses. And
Yes.
so you can see, for example, you know, things like Kaieteur, for example, have anti-cancer agents, but that requires sort of research. That requires a real plan. That requires someone saying, we're going to explore the ways in which we can use the indigenous products of Guyana. We're going to set up something at the University of Guyana and at the Guyana School of Agriculture to do this. You know, you think about our sugar industry. These are repositories of extremely well-honed technical expertise. They just don't grow sugar. Just like, I mean, I'm a fan of the sugar estates, so I quite often have gone to them. You know, there's a huge technical expertise that sits there, and that technical expertise needs to be repurposed in some way now to begin to bring this kind of science and technology to our agriculture sector. You know, often people are surprised to know that I think after the militaries globally, the biggest use of technology occurs in the agricultural sector. And so we need to think, okay, how do we upskill our agricultural sector? This is the way. I mean, people are always going to want to eat food, right? The oil might be done. We might move to renewables and, you know, solar panels and wind and all these things. But year after year, you know, people are going to eat food. We're going to need to grow, you know, soybeans. We're going to need to grow chicken. We're going to need to grow sort of meat. And these, I think, are the things that continue on. And this is the place where I think we need to make this investment. Yes.
But Dr. Blackman,
that's the point, if I will, in your program.
If I can add there, this point about Guyana realizing the full potential of its agricultural sector, and for you, our best bet in order to beat the resource curse is to invest in agriculture. But we would have seen over the years, even before the emergence of the oil and gas sector, we've had millions, billions of dollars in revenue from other extractive sectors, forestry, gold, diamond, bauxite. And we were still unable to take some of that revenue and really unlock this potential that you're talking about. With that in mind, I want to know if you believe that with the emergence of oil and gas revenues and the fact that we have all these other competing interests on the other hand, from the health sector, education, infrastructure, and this goal of saving money for future generations, do you really think that we will be able to realize this dream of becoming the breadbasket of the Caribbean? Do you think oil will make it easier or harder for us to achieve this dream?
I strongly believe that having the oil and the current sort of oil uh, sector and the resources that will accrue from it makes it easier for us to do it. What you've rightly identified is the sort of I wouldn't say will. You see, and this is part of what I'm arguing at this moment. I think
Mm-hmm.
we have often not planned as effectively, and we've often seen agriculture. I'm a bit older, I think, than you are, and well, I know that, and and when we were young, uh, in high school and so on, there was a real strong push towards agriculture. Except one of the things that we did was we resisted that very strongly. We thought that this was not, who wanted to have a career farming, right? Because we never really understood the full we never really understood the full dimension of what it means to farm and what it means to ensure that the scientific and technical dimensions of farming. I recently visited Iowa, and it was amazing to observe the level of sophistication at which this kind of farm belt, this corn belt area of the United States, uh, 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 has. And I think that that's part of the message, if you will, that I'm that I'm trying to communicate. That you have to be very clear about what you're doing. A lack of clarity on your aims is the thing that will hurt us the most. And I think we have to have some clear decision about where we're going. I'm just suggesting that agriculture is one of those directions that we should really take very seriously. Now, there are a number of people who will have other ideas, you know, forestry, the mining sector, fisheries. But I think all of these are, in a way, as we think about them, uh, you know, forestry, we will need to be in the business of managing the forest, right? So as we think about Guyana as being part of the Guyana Shield, and think about sort of some of the low carbon development strategies or the green development strategies, the question is which of these sort of pivots fit precisely in. If we think about the mining sector and the constant digging up of the earth, and the use of various chemicals in order to is this the place that you want to go? Which of these best fit with a kind of emerging sense that we want to move in a green, renewable manner? And so that's you see. So yes, there are going to be yes, this is going to be difficult. Yes, this is going to be something that has to be contested. Yes, there are other sectors that will claim the mantle, but I think on reflection, I think the place for us to sort of bet would be in the agriculture sector, and to figure out how do we use our oil resource to effectively catalyze that agricultural sector. And if we do it well, then I think we will have set ourselves up in a way that makes it very difficult for us to fall back after we have in a way gone through the oil resources.
Thank you very much for your perspectives on the matter of diversification, I'd like to turn your attention now to energy. Now, I'm sure you would have seen the debate that's taking place on the gas to shore project, the project that involves bringing a pipeline from the Liza project in the Stabroek block and connecting it to an industrial setup at Wales. Now, there's a lot of opinions when it comes to the pros and cons of such a project, but as a member of the diaspora, what are your thoughts?
So, so let me say that I so I'll give my answer in if I'll preface my answer with the following. In now I think maybe 2018, 19. Now I can't remember exactly. There was a Green Guyana a Green Guyana conference that was held at the Ramada Hotel, and there was kind of there at Providence, there was a kind of an associated, showing of green products and so on. So I was invited to speak at this event, and the one thing that I made clear, I thought in my remarks, was that the big challenge for Guyana's development, the big challenge, is the cost of electricity to Guyanese, right? So I think the central kind of question of energy has to do with how do we lower the electricity costs to the consumers, broadly individuals, but also for people who want to set up factories. If you want to do, for example, if you wanted to really process coconut water or something like this in a massive way, you need to have a factory, and the energy costs for operating that factory has to be sort of relatively small. So Guyana, it turns out, and there were some experts who made it very clear, and they went through comparing all of the energy costs as they related to the Caribbean. Guyana has some of the higher energy costs across the Caribbean. So I have been a kind of long proponent that yes, I mean we have a tremendous amount of gas that comes from this Liza project, and that gas could be turned into electricity for Guyanese, and it should be something that should be explored. And I think the other thing that I think is really important there, as you rightly identified, so if you the opportunity to create sort of genuine industrial zones for the development of industry and to support other sectors is something that's really, really vitally important. Like I was noted earlier, if you think of the Guyana sort of industrial sector, you can imagine that, say Banks DIH, the sugar producing factories, and not many. So I think there's an opportunity there for the development of industries and industrial parks that will support existing sectors. The other thing that I think is really important, particularly in this moment, is a kind of domestic self-sufficiency, right? You have your own gas, you have your own electricity. You can't. I mean, having visited and having lived, I mean, there's a moment there where the blackouts get, they're just too much, and so I think to have your own, to be self-sufficient, and to have a clean energy source like the gas to satisfy our energy demands is something that I think is extremely important. And then at a deep level, I think this really does strengthen our kind of broad sort of national energy security. So for these reasons, I think that it would be it is vital to take this opportunity to aim for this. Now, aim to use the gas. So that's where I start. Now, the question of how do we do it? So, I've seen kind of things where people suggested maybe we can have boats that bring it in. I've seen where people said, well, this pipeline is the appropriate way to go. In the previous government, there was a proposed natural gas project. I think that they also had this as an idea. So I do think that I want to say here, and I'm certainly open to having a longer discussion about this, but I think the answer should be yes. You should have some mechanism where you use the gas that is there, that is part of the Liza field, to generate energy for Guyanese. There are a number of very, very positive things that accrue from that. The challenge is how you do it, and I think that this is where the sort of argument, sort of exists. What is not there in the press is kind of, what are a clear sense of all of our options, right? What are all of the options as they relate to the pipeline? What are all of the options as they relate to the costs? What are all of the options as they relate to the economics? Is it actually going to be feasible, right? Someone has got to be able to say, what are the potential impacts? What are the potential impacts on the biodiversity? What are the potential impacts on the actual people who are living there? What things do we have to disrupt, and what do we gain? And so I think that sort of is where I think the argument should be, or at least that's where I hope the argument would be among the players. So I hope that they would all agree that we need to do this, and then the argument would be kind of like, how do we do it? And those are things that I think would be necessarily part of the discussion. The current kind of iteration of this thing sort of brings it to Wales. My intuitive sense, and I'll say why my intuitive sense is that this is something that I would support, and I'll say why. As we've noted, the sugar, we've seen the challenge of maintaining the sugar estates, their importance to our culture. I'm sure you, like I, growing up, we went into the back dams, we rode on these bunts, we'd gone when they burnt the cane. So there's a way in which this thing is in our blood. There's a way in which this thing is in us. It's hard for us. I mean, I think, I pointed out, in something that I wrote some time back, we've been doing sugar for almost 15, 20 generations. It's hard for us to even imagine what it's like. But again, we're at this sort of place in the road where it's kind of clear that the cost of producing sugar is more than the cost that we will get when we sell. So we're sitting at a loss. But you can't, and it seems to me that's you have to think about it. You can't immediately close them and say, well, okay, they're not financially viable. Why? Because there are entire communities that are connected to these various estates, right? So anyone who's gone to Rose Hall, anyone who's gone to Eiflot, anyone who's gone to Wales, you understand very clearly how communities are connected to these things. So the shops, the people, the people who drive the taxis, so there's a whole ecosystem that is connected. And so again, the question is the pivot. What do you pivot these things to? And so it seems to me that that's why I support, in a way, it's sort of coming to Wales, is that, okay, we need to find a new reason for these sugar estates or for these places. We need to configure them differently. And so bringing the sort of natural gas to this site seems like a good idea. Okay, now having said that, I don't know what process the current government went through in order to affect that site selection, right? And so that's the kind of thing that locally needs to happen, right? Someone needs to say, we had a site selection team. The site selection team consisted of the following people. Uh, Here were the following proposed sites that we decided to look at. And, some criteria for the sites. What are, the land, how much would it cost to develop the site? How far is the site from the FPSO? How accessible is the site? Do they have good roads, ports, etc.? So that sort of technical detail about how do so that would be the question I would ask, right? So we've chosen Wales, and I want to say up front, I kind of have a soft spot for Wales because I think that it's the sugar. The sugar is kind of on its way out. Let's kind of bring something else that can kind of use this place rather than just having kind of empty platitudes about what we're going to do but not doing anything. This is something that's really concrete. But then once you've done that, you now need to say, is the land the right kind of land? Is it going to cost us a lot of money to develop that land? It's how do we integrate Guyana Power and Light with this facility? Is that something that's easily accessible? Again, the pipeline, does it make the pipeline longer, shorter? Is the place where you have to put the pipeline, is this something that the route of the pipe network is going to be something that's sort of important? And then the obvious kind of socioeconomic and environmental aspects of it, having to do with, people, the environment, etc. So that again is the kind of discussion that should now be percolating in this process, right? So and again I say this having my own particular sense that that perhaps Wales is not a bad place, but I'm sure I would be interested in seeing
the technical details,
the actual site selection technical detail that says here is how we chose among the following the following 8 or 6 or 8 sites. These we put them up because of the following they met the following criteria, and then we made this choice and we came to Wales, and that's the aspect of it that I think. So in a sense, I wouldn't say that this is an easy decision to make. It's not. You really have to think through the criteria for the evaluation of the sites, and to see that you've made a really good decision in this regard. And I certainly do know that during the period, during some earlier period, that there had been some discussion in this regard, and I'm sure that those documents are sitting someplace, and one would hope that you can find them and begin to kind of go through them in something. You've actually given me an idea to write about in this regard. Yes.
So, Dr.
Yes.
Blackman, just before we go to our commercial break, what I gather from what you're saying is that there are benefits to us bringing gas to shore, and I believe this is an issue that Kaieteur News has spoken of in terms of highlighting the benefits of it. However, there's still the aspect or the critical question of economic feasibility, of the environmental feasibility of this project, knowing who are the individuals that would be responsible for gathering this information. What I gather from you is that we need to know all of these critical pieces of information as we move forward with this project.
I think the question, you're absolutely right, Ms. Wilburg. I think the question of the land, its appropriateness, the question of the development costs for the land. One would have to, get these. So if you're making a pipeline, so one would have to think about the soil characteristics. We would have to think about potential vulnerability to natural disasters, right? Because remember, it's so it's not an easy decision to say just put. There has to be a clear, sort of method that is transparent, that says, we made this decision, and here's why we made this decision, and here are the concerns, and here's how we mitigate those concerns, or here are concerns across the entire space, and here's how these concerns were mitigated. Yeah, so I think you quite understand me. But I mean, I am a maybe an emotional supporter of the idea that somehow we can pivot at our sugar estates to the energy sector. And I also think somehow, because you can potentially, you know, from the sugar cane do ethanol and this kind of thing, that somehow we can repurpose our sugar around not just sugar but sugar and energy. And this pipeline somehow fits in my head as something that should work there. But I don't want it to just, I don't want you to just, run a pipe, because I think that would be not a very good way to make a decision. I think you have to really do a proper evaluation of the site, and you really have to do that in a transparent manner, and you have to, inform the public as best as you can that, here's why we've made this decision, and here's why we think, this is going to be the best deal for our country. Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Blackman. We'll go to our first commercial break, and when we return, we'll wrap up tonight's discussion on local content. Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. If you are now joining us, this is this week's episode of Guyana's Oil and You. we're joined by the distinguished Dr. Terrence Richard Blackman, an associate professor of mathematics and a founding member of the Department of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College. So, Dr. Blackman, we would have wrapped up a very interesting discussion on the much talked about Gas to Shore project, and we would have spoken about the importance of ensuring Guyana has a diversified economy, particularly with investing some of our oil revenue in the agricultural sector, sorry. So now I'd like to turn your attention to something that you've written on recently, which is local content, which translates to Guyanese having maximum participation in the oil sector. So, with all that you've seen thus far and how we've prepared, how would you assess our efforts and what more do you believe needs to be done so that we can be successful where this matter is concerned?
So that's a very important question, and I think this goes to the heart of the matter of, you know, are we going to succeed in this transition?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question of local content is a really important one, but it's one that has to be approached with some care and some nuance. Uh, you know, when you think about the kinds of engineering and geophysical services that Exxon is engaged. I mean, I often think people are not fully appreciative of, we're 120, 130 miles out into the Atlantic, and we're a couple of miles down, and we're drilling in the seabed a couple of miles. This is an extremely technically sophisticated operation, right? This is not something that you and I can do in a short period of time. And so, as we think about local content, I think what we want to do is we want to set targets for how we participate, for Guyanese participation in the industry. But we don't want these targets to be sort of unrealistic targets. And more important, I think we want to begin to have a real clear conversation about, what are the jobs for which we are preparing people, and to have an infrastructure in place for doing this preparation. You see, I mean, I remember. So this is again not meant as a criticism. It's not meant as a. It's just meant as a kind of statement of. I remember visiting a few years ago, visiting Guyana and going to Ithaca in West Berbice, and there was an Emancipation Day event in Ithaca, West Berbice, and many of the individuals who were government figures and so on were there, and their constant message was to the gathered audience: prepare yourself for oil. And then when I said, I privately shared, I said, well, what exactly is the preparation that, if I'm in fifth form right now, right? So I'm fifth form at, St. Rose's, and you come to me and you say, prepare yourself for oil. What exactly should I be doing? Should I be just taking my CXC subjects? Is that the preparation? Should I be engaging in some kind of work study? Is that the preparation? Where do I go? What is the, what is the office that is there that is set up to say, okay, Guyanese young people, the oil will be with us for the next, here are the set of opportunities that are in this space. Here are the set of paths that connect you to these opportunities. Here's what I need you to do today. Here's what I need you to do tomorrow. So I think the thing that you don't want to get caught in with the local content is to say, we have these sort of local content goals on paper, but then they're really not goals in the sense that, you're not creating the individuals with the capacity to actually participate in these jobs in a meaningful way. And then you end up with just companies where, our young people get to be the cooks, they get to be, the help, and they don't get to be the engineers, they don't get to be the other things, because once more, we didn't have a very explicit plan around How many jobs are there available on a rig? What are the nature of the jobs that are available on the rig? So what's the demand for, petroleum engineers in the Guyana context? How many petroleum engineers are we going to have? How many people are we going to have who are doing welding? How many people, and I think that real attention to detail is something that I think you have to be aware of. You don't want to end up with the plan which just says, well, if if ExxonMobil wants to have steel, that they should have, like Guyanese made steel. But we've just been discussing about what it would mean to set up a plant for steel. And so essentially what it will be is a Guyanese company buying steel from someone outside of Guyana and selling it back to Exxon. And so that's not necessarily what you want in this local content thing. So I do think that, in order for us to really achieve these kinds of thresholds, what we want to be doing is to sort of investing in developing an oil and gas or technical training infrastructure. So, we're having a conversation with Exxon saying, here's how we want to place our people. Here are the places we want our people. We don't want them all sitting in the kitchen. We don't want them all. Yes, we want people doing those jobs, but we're training some of our young people to take on some of the front-end jobs for the management of this industry. And I think that's the way in which I would like to see us approach the local content, not to be enamored by the targets, but to be enamored by really figuring out how we ensure that young Guyanese boys and girls have the skills to participate in a meaningful way, so that they're the environmental engineers when we want to do an environmental impact study, that they're the reservoir engineers, they're the people who are sitting there on the rigs having an opportunity in a way, that they're the people who are engaged in the buying and selling of oil in the global marketplace. There's an example of Aberdeen, Scotland. That's become one of the areas in the world where you have, really massive oil and gas expertise. And part of that happened as a result of, of there being a clear plan about, we're thinking about how we engage our people in this industry, right? So I think that's what and engage our people broadly. So not just at the, 2 or 3 high schools in Georgetown and at the University of Guyana, but also in the Essequibo and also in Berbice and also in the rural areas. So that it's something that is broadly shared. So and you can't do that. I think this is the second thing maybe I want to really, really leave as the thing. You can't do that if you don't have a plan that is transparent and vetted, that you and I can go to and say, here's what our local content plan is. And here's how I fit into that local content plan. I'm a young man, 15 years of age at the, Campbellville Government Secondary School. How do I fit into the local content plan? I'm a businessman in, Rose Hall. How do I fit into the local? And there should be something there that says, here's who I go to. Here's the kind of skill that my children are interested in becoming petroleum engineers. Here's what we're doing in this regard. And it should be very, very clear. I think this is the, this is the thing that I hope the most for us, is that we don't become some of these places that, we create these jobs that are not capacity jobs, right? So it's sort of, someone has a job where they're going to work. It's an office. You sit there, you shuffle some pieces of paper around, but when this thing goes away, there's nothing. You haven't developed the capacity to, say, well, okay, Guyanese now are no longer working on oil fields in the Atlantic offshore Guyana, but they're working on oil fields, offshore Africa. They're working on oil fields offshore India. They're working. So we've built the capacity so that the people that we have in Guyana are the people who are the experts in the business of oil exploration. And I think that for me is, the goal of the local content, not just, Yeah, yes, you want the businesses to participate. Yes, you want, but the empty participation, I think we should be mindful of. And I know that sometimes, the sense is that you want to say, look, I need to be in this. I have to be in this. I want my company in this, and so on. But I think we also should be a little patient, and we should think, how do we best exploit this moment, and not be afraid to be patient in exploiting this moment, because you know, not be afraid to have the optimal plan for the moment, because once this moment is gone, it's not going to be something that comes back to us in it's once they've taken it out and it's gone, then we have to live with the consequences of it. And either we will have moved ourselves to another plateau, or we are still on the same plateau, and then we're looking around and thinking, well, what happened? And so for me, that's where I see the local content, kind of understanding what we have. Like, is there a map right now of our workforce? I know that we have 600,000 people who are 15 and above. Okay, of those 600,000, how many of them have bachelor's degrees? How many of them have associate? How many of them have gone to our technical institutes, GTI, etc.? How many of them are still in high school? How many of them have dropped out of high school? What are the various plans for the various segments of the market? In a sense, this is the local content. How do you really get local people involved? And then also, again, to not, as I said in the beginning, to not put all of the eggs in the oil and gas basket, right? So developing this local content plan also must include thinking about, where are people working, right? They don't all have to work on the rig, right? It's a large country. It's 83,000 square miles. It's got less than 1 million people. The vast majority of those people are sitting on the Atlantic coast. There's a massive interior with lots and lots of opportunities. So to figure out how do we reorient ourselves in this direction, and I think that's something to be, something to be taken seriously. And the one other thing that I would really want to say is, I've sort of said this in a kind of loose manner, but I think because we're small, right? We can't be, so because we're small, we can't be a place where people do mass production, right? If we're 700,000 now, what does it mean for us to get to 2 million? Sure, we're going to have some immigration in this moment, but to get to 2 million, we're probably looking at a certain 5-7 years before we get up to 2 million, right? And there will be a number of issues. So I think the other really salient idea that I would like to leave in the context of the local is that we have to be thinking about being the people that high on the food chain. You see, because we're small, we can't simply say we want the sort of, we want the jobs at the low end of the food chain. It's kind of what's happened in our sugar industry, right? We're just creating sugar, and then now the whole thing is falling apart, and we are not people who are doing something else with the sugar. So we have to be in the game of, adding value to the thing, right? That's where we're going to be successful, because we have to make everyone smart, because we're only 1 million. If we were, well, we're not even 1 million. We're 700,000, right? So if we're 700,000, we can't carry 400,000 just along, right? We have to make all 700,000, or our goal has got to be, we have to have human capital development as a kind of thing that we do over and over and over again. So that would be my third really important point, that we really think about what's the advantage of Guyana and Guyanese. Well, the advantage of Guyana and Guyanese is that we're, by and large, very smart people. I mean, I say that. Okay, so I think that's true. I mean, that's reflected in a number of areas. So, but by and large, we're sort of very, we're very smart, competent people, right? We can do things. It's our somehow the thing that we've come to the world with. And so I think just really building upon that human capital base, you know, we're a country that has a predisposition to education. You like we see, you know, every time I marvel every time I visit Canada, drive someplace, there are always lessons under some house or something, so we're a country that has this sort of predisposition to education, where people understand this. And so I think the thing that we don't want to do is to really, just focus everything on oil and not really be concentrated on the human capital development side of the ball, and really understanding that this is the competitive advantage for Guyanese. And so that, our local content plan should be about developing the capacity of Guyanese to participate at the highest levels in all of these industries, because that's ultimately the thing that will keep us. I mean, if we allow ourselves not to do that, I think we'll find ourselves, initially like, people who are there in an office, but then slowly over time, because we don't have the skill to engage the business in an appropriate manner, we find ourselves slowly being pushed out. And then over time, we will sit there, our children or our grandchildren will sit and say, what happened? This used to be, I used to live here, or my grandfather used to live here, but I no longer live here. So I think that aspect is important also.
Dr. Blackman, this has certainly been an enlightening discussion, and I think that there's a running theme through all of the perspectives that you've offered for the respective topics that we've dealt with: diversification, local content, and the Gas to Shore project. And that is, at the end of the day, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to get this right, and we have to be patient to have a clear plan to make the best of the opportunity that is before us.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is really, we have to articulate where are we going, how are we going to get there.
Indeed.
And that you can't run away. Without that, you will find yourself, trust me, you'll find yourself in real trouble.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blackman. And on that note, I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us once again for this week's edition of Guyana's Oil and You. It was a pleasure having you part of this discussion. And Dr. Blackman, thank you once again for making the time to share your knowledge with us. We do hope you can be back with us at another time.
Thank you very much, and thank your listeners, and thank your producers and all of the wonderful people there. It's been very, very wonderful conversation, and I look forward to doing it when the opportunity presents itself again in the future.
Thanks again. Good night. Thank you very much. Good evening, sir, and good evening to everyone who's tuned in. Please remember to stay safe, wear your mask, and please respect the curfew. Good night.